Welcome back to one of my favourite lectures. It's called Fantastic Fats. As we determined earlier in the week, fat is not the enemy. In fact, fat is an essential nutrient in the body. But because there are some fats that are dangerous for the body, I think that has caused all fats to be lumped into the same basket. So I'd like to define the fats today. To do this, we need to go a little bit into chemistry, but I'm going to make it really easy for you. It has to be easy for me to understand chemistry. But I love the proverb, Proverbs 16 verse 6, it's Proverbs 14 verse 6, that says, knowledge is easy to him that understands. When I give you an understanding, it's not hard to determine what are the best fats. We're going to begin by looking at flaxseed or linseed. It's the same thing. It is high in an essential fatty acid. See that word, essential fatty acid, EFA. Whenever you see the word essential, it means the body cannot make it. You've got to put it in. Omega-3 is an essential fatty acid, meaning the body cannot make it. The fact is that no creature can. Only plants can put omega-3 into their fatty acid chain. And what are we told is the highest source of omega-3? Fish. Why are fish high? Fish are high because they eat a one-celled algae that is high. I've got some good news. You don't have to eat the one-celled algae. You can eat the ground flaxseed or the chia seed, which we had this morning, and I think you'll agree that's a delicious way to have it. But what I want to show you is what this 3 means. I've drawn an 18-chain fatty acid here, and there are 19 trillion in one drop of oil. So that's the magnification we're looking at. Notice that there are hydrogen atoms either side of these 18 chains, and they're all joined in the middle by carbon atoms. What the 3 means is that the third carbon atom, so that's 1, 2, 3, there's a double bond. That means instead of one link, there are 2 links. And whenever you get a double bond, these 2 hydrogen atoms go, and the 2 hydrogen atoms underneath develop an electromagnetic field between them and repel each other. What that means is we've now got a kink in the chain. In flaxseed or linseed, chia seed, there are 3 double bonds in the 18-chain fatty acid. So there's 1, 2, 3, there's another one there, 1, 2, another one there. So we've got the hydrogen atoms here have gone. The hydrogen atoms underneath have developed an electromagnetic field between them. So we now have 2 more kinks in the chain. So what this does, it produces a very thin oil, a very fluid oil. And flaxseed and linseed, chia, they're known for their blood thinning effect because they're such a fluid oil. This oil is called a polyunsaturated fatty acid. Poly means more than one double bond. Unsaturated because there's some empty spots in the fatty acid chain. Many people say that word but not really knowing what it means. Let's have a look at the effect of double bonds on the body. It creates an electromagnetic field, and that's important because we are electrical people. Our nervous system, our brain is an electrical system. These double bonds are heat sensitive. They are also light sensitive. So the heat and the light are drawn or attracted to those empty spaces on the fatty acid chain. They also act like a magnet to oxygen. As a result, when you eat this food, your electromagnetic field is ensured, you're able to manage heat better, you're absorbing more vitamin D, more light, you're absorbing more oxygen into the body. Remember oxygen, the most vital element needed for life. Remember oxygen, cancer cannot live in the presence of oxygen. But if this seed is ground, immediately exposing these empty spots, that ground seed will deteriorate within an hour because the light, heat and oxygen will be attracted into those spots, causing the oil to go rancid. There's a very famous Australian doctor, her name's Dr. Sandra Cabot, and she's written a book called The Liver Cleansing Diet, where she made LSA famous. And you can go into shops in Australia and you can buy already ground LSA. What's the LSA? Linseed, sunflower and almond, all ground up. I say to people in Australia, don't touch it, because within 1 hour of grinding, it's destroyed. Now, you had it for breakfast this morning, and if you were there just before we prayed, you'll notice that I just took it out of the freezer. It was the last thing on the table, and it's the first thing to go back into the freezer. So we like to have it out no more than half an hour. You can get a little coffee grinder and grind it just before you put it on your breakfast. That's probably one of the best things. In his book, Depression: A Way Out, Dr. Neil Nedley, he looks at omega-3 and he also shows how important it is to conquer mental illness, that your brain has that essential fatty acid. It's such a beautifully fluid oil that it gives a lovely strength and integrity to our nerve cells, but it also ensures these little sparks of electricity from cell to cell. In his book, Udo Erasmus, his book, Fats That Heal, Fats That Kill, he quotes suicide victims who've had post-mortems and they found no omega-3 in their brain. So it's very important to ensure that you're having that. Remember, essential fatty acid, essential meaning, the body doesn't make it, you've got to put it in. Let me give you the omega-3 story. I found this very interesting. So the omega-3 found in flaxseed or linseed, chia, is called alpha-linolenic acid. And alpha-linolenic acid has 3 double bonds. So it's got three kinks in it, very thin oil. In the body, ALA is converted to EPA, eicosanoic acid, and it has 5 double bonds. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's even more fluid. In the body, EPA is converted to DHA, decohexaonic acid, and it has 6 double bonds. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's the most fluid, and it is DHA that is used exclusively by the body for cell membrane function and repair. So the fish eats the one-celled algae with its ALA. Then in the fish, ALA is converted to EPA. In the fish, EPA is converted to DHA. Man extracts the DHA, puts it into capsules and says, oh, this is far superior, because the DHA is already available for you. Can you see that? But my question is, if 3 double bonds is sensitive to heat, light and oxygen, how sensitive is 6? Is it possible to extract it with no exposure to light, heat or oxygen? And the fish that are the highest in DHA are the highest in mercury. And what's mercury? That's a neurotoxin. So personally, I have the flaxseed or the chia seed every morning. You can make delicious desserts. That ambrosia we had this morning, that was delicious. You could just about serve that as a dessert, couldn't you? So that's the omega-3 story. Now, one reason why some naturopaths say the fish oil is superior is because if a person's not drinking enough water, if they're having late nights, if they're having lots of coffee, refined sugar, alcohol, all that inhibits the conversion of ALA to EPA to DHA. And they say, well, they're not going to stop their coffee, they're not going to stop the alcohol, so just get the DHA. But what I say is, I believe they will stop when they find out how dangerous these things are to their body. All week, a man said to me, all week you've been telling us what to do, and on Saturday morning you tell us how. On Saturday morning we go to the part of the brain that influences our decisions. Let's have a look at sunflower. Sunflower is high in omega-6. 6 indicates the position on the fatty acid chain of the first double bond. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there it is there. And there are 2 double bonds in sunflower. So 1, 2, 3, there's another one there. So you've got hydrogen atoms along here, hydrogen here, hydrogen atoms here, hydrogen atoms along here, and you've got 2 repelling actions. So as a result, there are 2 kinks. This is not as thin an oil as the flaxseed or linseed, but it's still quite a thin oil, so it's given the name polyunsaturated fatty acid as well, because it has more than 1 double bond, and there are a couple of unsaturated spots on the fatty acid chain. What about olive and almond? They're high in omega-9. 9 indicating the position on the fatty acid chain of the first double bond. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There it is there. And there's only 1 double bond in almond and olive oil. So you've got hydrogen along here, 1 repelling action, 1 kink. And I think we can all identify that olive oil is a very thick oil, isn't it? That's because it's only got 1 double bond. So it's called a monounsaturated fatty acid. Mono meaning 1 double bond. Unsaturated because there is still an empty spot on the fatty acid chain. That's why when you buy olive oil, it's important to buy first cold pressed, extra virgin, and buy it in a tin or a dark bottle. What about the coconut? Notice that these 3 are all 18-chain fatty acids. That's called long-chain fatty acids. Whereas the coconut, it is a combination of short-chain fatty acids and medium-chain fatty acids. So the short-chain fatty acids would be 6, 8, 10 chains. The medium-chain fatty acid would be 12, 14, 16 chains. I've drawn a 10 here. The coconut has no double bonds. So every spot is full. And notice in the coconut oil on the bench where you do your oil pulling, it's solid. That's right. So it's called a saturated fat. It's solid in the fridge. When I'm in Fiji, it's nearly always liquid because it is hot, and so it melts. And you will notice that when you oil pull, it melts in your mouth, doesn't it? One man said, "Oh, I melt the oil in the microwave and then I oil pull. Is that right?" I said, no. The microwave changes the structure. It's, no wonder Russia banned it in 1976. No, I said, put it in your mouth, it'll melt within minutes. So what's the best oil? Well, which body function are you talking about? Because the body uses them all, but it uses them for different processes. To understand that, let's have a look at how digestion handles them. So here is the mouth, here is the esophagus going into the stomach, and here is the liver under your right rib. Actually, that's not quite right because the liver is much larger than the stomach, so we'll actually give it a big hat. Underneath is the gallbladder, and the gallbladder comes down and connects with the neck of the pancreas. There's the pancreas. And there's the pyloric sphincter, which we looked at yesterday. So let's have a look at how digestion deals with these 3 long-chain fatty acids. Not broken down in the mouth, not broken down in the stomach. The only food that's broken down in the stomach is the protein, and it needs that acid to do that. Then the oils come through here, and here's the liver, and underneath the liver is the bile duct that takes the bile away from the gallbladder. You see, the gallbladder is really just a reservoir to hold the bile. It's the liver that makes the bile. And then the bile comes down through the common bile duct into the neck of the pancreas, comes into the duodenum and breaks down the fat into tiny particles. And then pancreatic lipase comes in and further breaks the fat down. And when it's broken down, then it is absorbed into the villi. Now up in the middle of the villi, this is what lines our small intestine, there's a lacteal. And those long-chain fatty acids are absorbed straight into the lacteal. That's your lymphatic system. Taken up to the thymus, then to the liver, and then sent where the liver needs it. But often it stores it because these thin oils, they're the body's surgeons. That's what it uses for cell membrane function and repair. But the coconut oil is totally different. Underneath the tongue, there are sublingual glands called lingual lipase. And lingual lipase is an enzyme that breaks down short and medium chain fatty acids. So the coconut is unique in that the breakdown happens in the mouth. So when it comes down into the stomach, it's already having its breakdown. When it comes into the duodenum, it doesn't need bile, doesn't need pancreatic lipase, and gets absorbed not into the lacteal, not into the lymphatic system, but it gets absorbed straight into the blood. The blood immediately takes it to the liver, and the liver burns it as fuel. What an amazing oil. So to say that saturated fat causes heart disease is an unscientific statement. It doesn't make any sense because it's the saturated fats that the body uses for fuel. The other day we looked at how glucose burns at 4 calories per gram, whereas fat, it burns at 9 calories per gram. Can you see why the brain loves fat? Because a calorie is a unit of energy, and when we give fat to the brain, it's getting more than twice the units of energy when you eat fat. So the book Stop Alzheimer's Now and Stop Autism Now. Stop Alzheimer's Now is about all adult neurodegeneration. It covers Alzheimer's, dementia, Huntington's chorea, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's. And then Stop Autism Now looks at all childhood neurodegeneration, which is epilepsy and attention deficit syndrome, hyperactivity, definitely autism. In both books he shows if you can get the carbohydrates down and have generous proteins, fibres, good fats, and he says start supplementing with coconut oil. And what happens in the liver breaks down the fat, particularly your short and your medium chain fatty acids. It breaks the fat down to ketones. And the brain loves ketones as fuel. But ketones have been proven to be neurohealers. Ketones have been proven to be neuroprotectors. And in both books, he has stories of people who've been recovering from these neurological problems on this. It's basically the keto diet. He calls it the coconut ketogenic diet. Interesting. So you see, fat can be used as a healer. I don't take spoonfuls of coconut oil every day, but if I had any signs of dementia, I think I would start. And by the way, these people that are having 4 teaspoons of coconut oil 3 times a day, they're not dying of heart disease. They're not having strokes because it's not the fat that causes this. The ketogenic diet's been around since about the 1920s to help conquer neurological problems, and the people on the ketogenic diets aren't dying of heart disease. Because remember, we looked at that, it's not the fat. The fat's not the problem. So what are the dangerous fats? The dangerous fats would be the altered fats. The other dangerous fat is the huge amount of fat that's dumped in the body from the high carbohydrate, high sugar diet, which we also looked at when we looked at the liver. So what are the altered fats? One of the most dangerous altered fats is the margarine. Margarine was introduced in the 1980s to help prevent heart disease. Has it? No. It's made no difference at all. And what's the definition of insanity? To do what you've always done and expect different results? No, it hasn't made any difference at all. Because, as we have learned, it is not fat that causes heart disease. But this is an altered fat. How do they make margarine? Let's say they're going to make it out of flaxseed. Well, they've got a problem, and that is it's liquid. So we've got to make it solid. So what they do is they saturate it with hydrogen ions, and that causes one of the hydrogen atoms to flip over to the other side, which now means the double bond's gone. And to be able to saturate it with hydrogen ions, they have to use a catalyst. And the catalyst is usually aluminium. That's probably the most common catalyst. And I think most people are aware of the link between aluminium and damage in the brain. Now we've got a solid fat. That's a very dangerous fat. In fact, it's only one molecular structure short of plastic. And when margarine comes into the body says, I do not recognize you. And so what it does, it quickly has to either store it. We're talking about lipomas before, you know, those fatty lumps that people are getting in their body. It's basically, well, there are a few theories, but one theory is that the body can't get rid of the poisons quickly enough, so it just binds it up in a little fatty lump. Skin cancer rates have risen since people have been eating margarine. It is a proven fact that macular degeneration is caused by margarine. You see, the fine mechanisms in the eyes, in the ears, in the brain, they love this omega-3, but if you're not giving it the omega-3, it's just got to use whatever's available. There is only one margarine that is not made by the hydrogenation of oil, and that is earth balance. And earth balance is made by combining together a liquid oil and a saturated fat. That's basically how they do it. The problem is it contains canola oil. Now, canola oil has traditionally been high in a fatty acid called uracic acid. Uracic acid is toxic for humans. So they genetically modified the canola to reduce the uracic acid levels. Now it's got the FDA tick. I'm sorry, but you have to be cautious of that FDA tick. You've now got a genetically modified oil. It is a cheap oil. It's a very cheap plant to grow. And it does contain the omega-3s and 6s, but the oil is extracted with high heat, so they're destroyed. Let's have a look historically. Let's have a look at historically at mankind 200 years ago. Let's go to Europe and look at the northern European countries. What was the fats that they used in northern Europe? It would have been animal. It would have been butter. So you look at Norway, Sweden, Finland, they've traditionally get their fats from the cows, yeah? But you see, 200 years ago, the cows weren't given antibiotics. The cows, the milk was probably not pasteurised. The only reason they pasteurise milk is because of dirty dairies. And when the milk is pasteurised, then now you've lost all your vitamin C, the milk has changed. You give a baby calf homogenised, pasteurised milk, they don't survive. So a couple of hundred years ago, in the clean dairies, and the people were used to dairy, so they had the enzymes in their gut to break it down. I don't. I'm Scottish descent. I don't think there's any dairy in my heritage because it's something I can't handle very well. Now let's come down to the Mediterranean. And the oil that is mostly used in the Mediterranean would be the almonds and the olives. And then let's come right around the equator and we get the coconut. The coconut oil and the olive oil are the only two oils that have been extracted from the flesh of the plant. So women had little wooden presses in their kitchens, and they could press those olives to get that olive oil. They found that if they just put it in a bowl on the bench or on the table, it got a bitter taste. And scientifically we now know, because that's a double bond. But what they found is if they extracted the oil, put it into a clay jar with a cork lid in the basement, in the cool, then it kept its fresh taste, because they've now stopped the heat, light and oxygen getting to it. All through the South Pacific Islands, women have grated the coconut, put it with water, squeezed out the fibre to get a white milk, and then they put it in a little double saucepan, and the oil rises to the top. So traditionally, depending where you lived, it influenced the oil that you ate. I was talking to ladies in Europe recently, and they said our mum used to grind sunflower because it's quite an oily seed, and she could squeeze the oil out of that. But probably about 100 years ago, man developed high heat chemical equipment to be able to extract oil from the hard seeds. And so now you can get grapeseed oil, you can get the sunflower oil, you can get the oils from these seeds. But notice what I said, they use high heat and chemical equipment. So when you extract these hard seeds, the oil out of the hard seeds, with heat, what's happening to your double bonds? They're all being destroyed. So the oils you see on the supermarket shelf, maybe peanut oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, notice that they're all in clear bottles, plastic bottles. It's no use to put them in dark bottles because they're already totally destroyed. So don't touch those oils. The only oils that I use are the coconut oil and the olive oil. Where do I get my polyunsaturated fats? I get it from the food that I'm eating. I get it from eating the seeds and the nuts. That's the best place to get it because they deteriorate so quickly. So when the theory first came up, Ansel Keys, 1953, he first put forth the theory that fat causes heart disease. Did you know that it's never been proven? Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, the cardiovascular surgeon who wrote the book The Great Cholesterol Con, that's what he says. I'm still waiting for the research. And unfortunately, when Ansel Keys presented this theory, he said, we're sure the research will come. Is that scientific? That's not at all. It's guessing. It's actually just coming up with theories. And we know it can't be true because all the steps they've taken to reduce heart disease have not reduced heart disease. Yes, the polyunsaturated fats are good oils, but not if they've been extracted and destroyed. The almonds and the olives, the sunflowers, they're best eaten. The olive oil, notice the Bible talks about the olive oil. The only reason the Bible doesn't talk about coconut oil is because coconuts didn't grow where the Bible was written. And there's the lovely story about Elijah, who God told him to hide in the forest after he'd told King Ahab to turn away from his idols or there'll be no rain. When the raven stopped feeding him and the brook dried up, God told him to go into this little village where there was a widow collecting sticks. And he said, ask the widow to make you a little bread. And the widow said, I'm about to make bread. We're collecting sticks for the fire. But she said, it's our last meal and our last oil. And do you remember what Elijah said? God has said, he said, you bake it for me because God has said that the oil will not lack and the meal will not lack and the oil will not fail in the 3 years where there'll be no rain. So every single morning, it was a lady and a little boy. I imagine this little boy going in and finding more oil every morning. Every morning God put oil in that cruse. What's God just said about olive oil? It is good. Now, we're not suggesting you drink a cup of olive oil, but a little. We need a little oil. It's a concentrated food. We don't need a lot. In fact, it wouldn't be pleasant to eat a lot, but it certainly makes food taste nice. Our palate tells us that. So now I'm going to have a look at planet Earth. We just touched on it, and I want to show you how it's perfectly designed, the foods in that area for our body. Here's planet Earth. Here is the equator. And if you look at the equator, what food's grown there mostly is the coconut. And when you have a look at the coconut, it's a saturated fat, and it's perfectly designed for that hot climate. Because it has no double bonds, it's heat resistant, light resistant, and oxygen resistant. Perfectly designed for that climate. Then we come up to the Mediterranean, and that's when we find the olives and the almonds. So there's your omega-9s. Here's your saturated here. Perfectly designed for that environment. And then we come up a little bit more, and you will find the omega-6s right up the top. You'll find the omega-3s. The Eskimos eat a lot of seal blubber, fish. It's very high in omega-3 because the plants that they eat are very high in omega-3, perfectly designed for that environment. And if you go into those igloos, which actually are quite warm, and you see what they're eating, you'll hear a lot of laughter. There's no depression because they're eating so much omega-3. That's your brain functioning essential fatty acid. But across Europe today, spreading across Europe about this area here, there's a disease called the SAD disease. It's seasonal affective disorder. Have you heard of it? It's depression. They're saying it's because there's not enough sun. There's never been sun. There's never been much sun. But the fact is they're not getting out in the sun as much as they used to. But they're not eating their native food. They're eating the SAD diet. The SAD diet causes the SAD disease. What's the SAD diet? It's the standard American diet, which is almost totally efficient in these omegas. Udo Erasmus quotes a study where they took a sample of a plant grown here, and it was very high in omega-3. Sorry, 9. So he took a sample of a plant grown here, it was very high in omega-3. Same species of plant grown further up, it was higher in omega-6. Same species of plant grown right up the top, it was higher in omega-3. In other words, the plants grown in our area are perfectly designed for our body's needs in that area. I'd like to have a look, considering what we've looked at, I'd like to have a look at the food triangle. So when I was at school and I studied common sense cookery, we had a common sense cookery cookbook, and it had a triangle in it. And the bottom rung of the triangle was meat and dairy. The next part of the triangle was grains. The next part of the triangle was fruit and veg. And right up the top of the triangle were fats and sugars. That was the triangle in my book, my Common Sense Cookery book in the 1960s. Because heart disease became the #1 killer, they changed the triangle. So the triangle was changed in about the 60s. Sorry, it was probably more about the 70s it was changed. In the 60s it looked like that. Late 70s, maybe even going into 80s, they put on the bottom rung of the triangle, because of Ansel Keys' theory that fat causes heart disease, they took the meat and dairy away and they put the grains there. And they acknowledged the protective effect of fruits and vegetables. So the fruit and vegetables, they say take that in a little bit more. And then the meat and dairy came up here. The dairy and the meat industries were not happy with this triangle. And the fats and sugars up the top. But that's caused a whole lot more problems. It has not resolved heart disease. It's still the #1 killer, but now it's got something that's vying for the top, and that is cancer. And when you consider that cancer cells consume 15 times the glucose of any other cell, no wonder this triangle has brought the cancer up. And at the same time, have a look at the hybridization of the wheat, causing even more sugar to be released. No wonder cancer is neck to neck with heart disease in the #1 killer in the world today. What should the triangle be? What should be on the bottom rung of the triangle? Vegetables. There's no limit on the vegetables. We'll put fruit in here because for some people they can eat more fruit than others. If someone has diabetes, someone wants to lose weight, someone wants to conquer their cancer, then the fruit needs to come down a little bit. Probably not a surprise to you to hear me only put 3 rungs on my triangle. Then the legumes and the seeds. Pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds, and the grains. I put the grains up the top of the middle rung. And then right up the top we've got our nuts. Nuts are delicious, but don't overdo them. We've got our nuts, we've got our oils, we've got our MS's, maple syrup, we've got our honeys. They are very concentrated foods, but you don't need very much. So let's have a look at why this triangle is the best triangle. So we're going to have a look at it through a few different windows. Let's have a look at it through the pH window. So what are the most alkaline foods? Your vegetables. What are the most acid? The little things up the top. So it gets a tick. What about the liver? Now, do you remember in our 3 phases of the liver detox, we looked at the importance of having lots of beta-carotenes found in your orange and your green-coloured vegetables. We looked at the importance of proteins. There's proteins there, there and there, so it gets a tick. Let's have a look at the colon. The colon needs to be swept every day. What's the highest fibre food? Vegetables. So we've got another tick there. What about cost? What's your cheapest food? Vegetables. How much do you get for $50 in the fruit and vegetable department? A whole box. How much do you get for $50 in the meat department? I don't know. I haven't bought meat for about 50 years. I think only this much. How much do you get for $50 when you're buying your oils, nuts and honeys? Not a lot. So cost, and that's fine because you only need a little bit of that. So cost, it gets a tick. What about availability? What's always available? Your vegetables. At different times of the year, there are different vegetables available. My daughter lives in Wisconsin. I went down to her basement pantry to get something, and wow, she got shelves and shelves and shelves. In the summertime, you call it canning. I don't understand why it's called canning because they're all bottles. But she preserves a lot. And the vegetables and the fruits can be preserved. So availability, it gets a tick. So that triangle gets a tick no matter how you look at it. Now what some people have a question about is if we stop eating dairy products, cheeses, creams, yogurts, milk, how are we going to get our calcium? Let's have a look at the glass of cow's milk. Here's a glass of cow's milk. It's high in protein and high in calcium. But this protein, this animal protein, is very dirty burning fuel. Only 58% is burnt as fuel. So what that does is it leaves a 42% waste. Now that is a sulfur waste. It's very acid And do you remember what the body uses to negate acidity? Calcium. So the calcium from that glass of cow's milk is used to negate that acid residue. How much calcium is left for our body? None. So the countries in this world that consume the highest amounts of dairy products have the highest incidence of osteoporosis. That's why I found one of the most fascinating books I've read was The Calcium Lie by Dr. Robert Thompson. His story is interesting. He was a GP, just about to get out of medicine because people were not getting better. That's a bit hard when you spent 7 years training. So he decided to do a nutrition course and his eyes were open. He said, we learn all this in med school, but it's just, you speed through it. It's very hard to retain everything. And he was amazed at what they were taught compared to what really is. Same thing happened with Colin Campbell. He was taught, he was the author of the China study, he was taught that you have to have meat for protein and milk for calcium. And when he went to the Philippines, because children were dying of liver cancer, he presumed the wealthy children would not be dying, but the poor children would be. But the opposite was true, because the children in the little villages were eating a lot of minerals. They were eating island greens, they were having soy, a little bit of fish, rice. But in the city, they were having what Time magazine calls the meat sweet diet. Lots of meat, lots of dairy, refined foods. So where do we get our calcium? Remember we looked at that the other day? We get our calcium in the state that God meant us to have it, which is your whole salt. All the other minerals need to be together. Your whole salt, also your dark green leafy vegetables. Should be eating them every day. And as we just looked at, you won't lose your minerals if you cook them. So yes, collard greens are still all right. But I think we're having collard greens this week. I think we're having a southern meal today. I think we're having cornbread, beans and collard greens. Someone's got the inside info. And when you think of it, that's almost a complete meal. You've got your beans, and you know the best way to make cornbread is to put a nice helping of olive oil or coconut oil or both in. Otherwise that corn meal can get quite dry. So that's where you're going to get your calcium from. But what you've also got to look at, I'm putting a cross here, this is a no, because these things leach the calcium, and that's the refined sugar. So your refined sugar, all your refined carbohydrates. But what also leaches the calcium out of the body is caffeine. And so many Americans are having caffeine. No wonder people have got osteoporosis. So they must all stop, and bones need exercise. And what strengthens bones is defying gravity. And the best gravity-defying exercise is your rebounder. That makes for strong bones. Figs, they've got a nice amount. Figs are nice, dried figs. Also sesame seeds. There's more calcium in sesame seeds than I think any other from the vegetable kingdom. And a nice way to have sesame seed is tahini. And a lot of the dressings in your book have tahini in them. Gives a nice creaminess to dressings. I think there's even some puddings that have tahini in them. Now one day Ellen White said in page 127 of the Ministry of Healing, the only hope of better things is the education of people in the right principles. People do not know, do they? And when you think about it, most people are educated from media. And the media that they are most educated from is basically the television. and they have the most beautiful models, and they have the most handsome models, and they're advertising the sugars, they're advertising the Coca-Colas, they're advertising candies and chocolate bars, and the message, the subliminal message coming through is, you will be this happy and look this good if you eat that. Isn't that true? And I know in Australia there are a lot of ads to cereals, and cereals have a lot of sugar in them. That's why the kids want them. So we've really got to get back to basics. I'm not interested in being in the kitchen all day. That's why a slow cooker can be great. You can cook your millet overnight. So the millet we had this morning, it had 4 cups of water in it to 1 cup of millet. So it needs a lot more water, and Cynthia baked it in the oven, as she baked the rice in the oven yesterday. That's a nice slow cook, or the slow cooker. One lady I know has got 3 children, and she said, my slow cooker's constantly on. She said, overnight it does my millet. And she said, then the different kids are catching buses or going to work at different times. They can just get a bowl, put the millet on. They've got maybe the stewed apple there, or maybe a spoonful of honey, coconut cream, or organic soy milk, chop a whole lot of fruit on top, and there's, especially if you put your chias on and your ground flaxseed, that's a very substantial breakfast. That will keep them going for a long time. And she said, what happens then is I then put my legumes in it. She said, I've soaked my legumes, I've brought them to the boil on the top of the stove, I've rinsed them again, then I put them into the crock pot with all the vegetables. And she said when they come home from school at about 3:30, she said, then I serve the next meal. That's easy, isn't it? There's not a lot of work in that. So it's just finding a lot of shortcuts. Some people go home and they'll soak a whole lot of legumes overnight. Then they'll rinse them the next day and cook them in different pots. Then they'll freeze them in little cup-size freezer bags. So that makes it very easy. So it's just looking for your shortcuts. Remember, the worst time to plan your meal is when you're hungry. At breakfast, you've got to be thinking about lunch. And the night before, you've got to be thinking about breakfast the next day. It only takes a minute. And when we have our lecture on the mind on Saturday morning, I'll show you the part of the brain that actually does the planning. So the planning's important. What I have endeavoured to do in these lectures is show you why the fruits and veggies are important, to show you why the fats are important, to show you that there are fats that heal and there are fats that kill, and we need to be eating the good fats. But again, not in large amounts. Tomorrow we're going to be looking at 3 very important subjects: exercise, water, and salt. So I look forward to going through those principles with you tomorrow.